Hello, this is Christopher and Catherine, your favorite 401 couple. Today we have another guest, Eric Dyson. I've been waiting a very long time, 12 minutes, to be able to introduce Eric. It's been a lot longer. It's been a lot longer than that. All right. So today we have Eric Dyson of 90 North Consulting. We will share his LinkedIn link in the podcast feed.
What do you think when I say 90 North to you?
The North Pole.
Is that it?
It's exactly what it is.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Well,
so secondary question, where he's located. What do you think that is?
Huh?
What do you think it is, the latitude? Trivia question.
He's not at 90 North.
No, he isn't. What do you think it is? I looked it up.
It's not 45 North either. What?
No, it's not. I think it's 33. Do you think you're 33, Eric?
You know better than I do. I haven't looked that up, but 33, that would sound about right for latitude. Yeah.
So what I'm guessing is his company is named like True North Pole.
Right.
But where he's sitting right now is 33.
Okay.
I'm fascinated by things like that. You keep going. I'm fascinated by that.
Since you bring it up, can I tell you just a little more about the logo?
Yes, I'm fascinated by this, Eric. Please tell me how you got here.
So I have been under the polar ice cap in a submarine. Okay, a lot of the speaking I do, I have a picture of me standing on the polar ice cap. And 90 North does represent the North Pole. Not too many people come up with that, so I am impressed.
Really?
And the North Pole would represent the top of the world. And that's where I will take you to with my skills and consulting work. Now, if you don't want to go all the way to the top of the world, the background is mountains. So I'll just take you to the top of the mountain if you don't want to go all the way to the top of the world.
Okay.
See, I was hoping there was a great story about this.
Okay. So should I finish doing the introduction?
Yes. Well, my curiosity is satisfied for the moment.
Okay. So Eric Dyson, ERISA advisor search, keynote speaker. He's got an expert witness, executive director of 90 North Consulting, U.S. Navy Academy graduate. I was looking forward to reading this part as the surprise. Navy veteran. And from his LinkedIn page, Eric has experience as a nationally known record keeper, Fidelity, as well as experience as an ERISA plan advisor. He helps plan sponsors conduct searches for ERISA plan advisors as well as plan record keep searches. And he is a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy and a former nuclear trained submarine officer. I thought that was pretty cool. And as he says, those experiences combined are very rare. So welcome, Eric, to our attempt at a podcast. It's
Thanks for having me.
To be here, sir.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Thanks so much.
Okay. So as some people know from our shtick with our other videos, there has to be a treat involved. And Eric picked not Topo Chico, but ranch water. I keep calling it the wrong thing. Ranch water. Do you have your drink, Eric?
Here is my ranch water.
I
Okay.
want to just say on ranch water, this will be interesting. We're trying it. When I first heard about it, I thought it was going to be like, from a Midwesterner point of view, like cow tipping or something. Like when somebody tells you to go get the ranch water, like you go off into the woods and you don't come back. But I'm glad it's something.
So cheers, Eric.
Cheers, Eric.
Cheers.
Okay, a little too much water, not enough ranch, but I think I can drink more of this.
Not enough ranch.
You might need a little more lime juice in it too. That'll make a difference.
Yeah, we got what I put in there, Grand Marnier.
Oh yeah, good topper on there. I like that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so what would you like to talk about?
Well, Eric is a fiduciary expert. Right. You are comfortable with the E word, correct?
I am. And I've been told by some of the attorneys that I work for that I should not be humble in that because we don't want the court saying that I'm not an expert. So, yes, I am comfortable with the E word.
Okay. I say that because I am often introduced as an ERISA expert. And while I might know more than everybody else in the room about ERISA, I don't feel comfortable with the E word, so expert word. So it's nice to talk to somebody who is. And if you're going to be an expert witness, you better be an expert, right? Okay. So, Eric has probably a much more difficult job than I do, or he's in that the concept of being a fiduciary inside an ERISA plan is something that is very substantial. It's a great big deal. And I'd like to know how you got from standing on top of the North Pole to standing in a courtroom talking about ERISA fiduciary rules, because I can't imagine two things further apart.
Well, okay, let's talk about the small things they have in common, which there is a story there, and there's no sarcasm in that, but to run a nuclear reactor in the nuclear engine room of a submarine requires a lot of procedures, a lot of manuals, a lot of checklists, a lot of items. I mean, you're smiling already, but I mean, it covers, about 95%, and whatever that number is, 95, 98%, covered almost all the majority of situations. And then you'd have these, once in a lifetime experiences that you hoped your training helped you out with, but there was an issue with learning how to document what you're doing and having procedures. Okay, so now let's move on to the question you're also asking. Well, how does one become an expert witness? And I tell the same story as if you ever were picked last on the playground for kickball, and you knew what that felt. That's kind of how I started as an expert witness. Okay, it was the Duke 403B lawsuit. Plaintiffs' attorneys needed somebody with very short notice. And what they needed was someone who had 403B experience. I did. Someone who was an advisor. I was. Someone who was a 321 fiduciary. And for those that don't understand 321 and 338, probably most of the audience do. We can just skip over that. But they needed to know I had certain experience. The only thing I didn't have was expert witness experience. And because it was a short timeline, it was kind of like, I guess we'll take you. You're the best that we can come up with, right? And so I had to learn what the litigation experience was and deposition, et cetera, et cetera. And then by chance, my second go around as an expert witness was at the Reitz versus Lowe's trial, and I went all the way to testifying in court. So after my first two expert witness engagements, I now have on my resume, I've been an expert witness, and I have on my resume that I've testified in court. And that kind of leads to more things along the way there.
Okay. So what is, I don't know, it's a two-part question. You get to pick whichever one you want first. What's either the most important point you need to get across, or what's the most difficult point you need to get across? I got a feeling they're not the same thing.
I think they actually might be the same thing, Christopher. And in my tagline on my webpage and my podcast of Be More Than a Fiduciary, I paint this picture of building a house, right? And I start on one end of the spectrum of your legal bare minimum requirements as a fiduciary, because there are some legal requirements, right? And that's the equivalent of the foundation of the house, right? Because we talk about that, we talk about fiduciary best practices, we talk about being a good steward, but if I build a house one step at a time, right, I need the foundation. Next is the frame. Then I need walls, I need a roof. If I skip right to drywall and decorations and I ignore the foundation, the house will look good for a few years, right? And so it's difficult because the foundation's not exciting. It's not sexy, right? It's not where, as we live day to day, we come into our house coming home from work, or hey, wonder how the foundation's doing, right? You don't think about that.
It's not even seen.
You don't see it, right? And so we can tend to skip to the finer things. I mean, I'm having my patio redone. That's an example of an extra, right? So how does that relate to ERISA? What is the most simplest and what's the most complicated is most fiduciaries have the right heart, Okay, there's exceptions out there, right? There are people that are trying to get away with as little as possible. And sometimes they will skip right to the furniture and the decorations and the color of the bathroom hardware and forget about the foundation, right? Their heart's in the right place and they're trying to do the right thing, but they ignore some details and there become cracks in the foundation. So I just, and the other thing I'll add on to that, we're continuously getting new people in our business, new people in HR, new people at companies, right? And as old as we are, we think, well, haven't we been talking about this for 30, 40 years, just had the 50th anniversary? Well, there's people at companies that they've been an HR benefit manager for 3 years, and they're working on the 401k for the first time for a month. So the easiest and the hardest is covering that whole spectrum of covering the law, but being a good steward.
Okay. I've got some other questions, but you've got actually some more prepared notes than me, Catherine. Would you like to ask him your first question?
Well, in your experience, what are the best practices for fiduciaries to ensure that they're fulfilling their obligations? What are the best practices to be on the right road?
Quick story for you, and that'll answer the question. Catherine, I had a very sophisticated client. It was a plan over 100 million, so not huge. I think most people would call it mid-market, but big boardroom for every quarterly meeting, right? And they were, I'm not trying to over-sophisticated, but legal was there. There were about 4 people from HR there. The CFO was always there, right? There were about 8 or 10 people on the committee. And I get a call one day from the benefit manager, and she said to me, "Hey, Eric, I get a little lost in some of this stuff that goes on at the committee meeting. Do you mind coming by my office and help me get up to speed?" And I said, "Sure, I'd be more than happy to do that." And I come in, start talking investment policy statement, quarterly review, right? And within the first couple minutes, she says to me, "Eric, hang on a second. What's a mutual fund?" That was your question. Okay. Now, Christopher, you're kind of scratching your head, but let's look at what happened here.
No, but I see it. I see it.
Yeah. She had the courage to ask the question, right? And when I do, even for my podcast and some other things, I'll tell people, hey, let's pretend we're very, very smart, inquisitive ninth graders trying to figure out how a 401k works and how ERISA works. And I think that as people get this role as a fiduciary, they think they're supposed to know it all. So they don't necessarily ask the questions. And that's just, they need to understand, they need to be continuing to learn about this stuff. Let's go back to something, Christopher, you said, hey, am I comfortable with the E word, the expert? I'm not an expert in everything in ERISA. I get offers to be an expert witness on things all the time. And I say, no, this is outside my expertise. So I think the answer to that question is you just have to keep learning and keep asking questions and not be afraid to do so.
Yeah. And I think actually you're putting a really important point about fiduciary people kind of go serious, pay attention, but a lot of it is those poking questions to go, is this really right? Are these fees really appropriate? Or there does need to be some inquisitiveness to it in general, don't you think? Or
100%. Christopher, do I need to pause since you got a hand up there?
No, I'm just, if I can add on to that, or maybe you want to make this completely separate. Is it now easier with the tools that record keepers give us and with what the broker dealers are doing with 321 and 338? Is it now easier for a plan sponsor to meet their fiduciary requirements? Or have I completely thrown her question off the rails?
No, I think they do go together. And I think what I'm going to go back to is I might be avoiding the question here, but it's my answer. So if I'm avoiding the question, maybe I should run for president. But I want to go back to what I said. There's continuously new people coming into benefits, coming into committees, right? So we think that, hey, there's more transparency, it's easier and it's better. But there are still people that we, in the position we serve in the industry, we still need to educate them. So Catherine, I think the question that you asked was, well, how do I know, right? Do I know that I have a good arrangement? Is my record-keeping arrangement fair? Are my TPA fees fair? And I think it's as simple as asking that question, okay? And let me elaborate it on a little bit, because I don't want the listener to walk away with just, something that's very 20,000 feet. I've seen in litigation where plans have done benchmark. And the reason it gets to litigation, I've found errors in the benchmark, or I've seen where the data is there, but it was interpreted wrong. So if somebody would have said, hey, walk us through this. Why is this looking like this? Why are we doing this? And one of my favorite questions that, is a little different what you said, but answers both of you is, why do we have the target date fund suite that we have? Why do we have the default investment that we do? And I think most plans would say, well, that's the one the advisor suggested. But if you ask a couple questions, why did you suggest this? Why do we have, and pick a number of target date funds. Why do we have American Century? Why do we have T. Rowe Price? Why do Fidelity's our record keeper? Why do we use Fidelity? Why? And dig down. So, Christopher, to your point, there are a lot more tools out there, but I need the knowledge of how to use those tools.
Well, what I want to put a cherry on that thought in the sense that when I've heard about cases of fraud in our field, a lot of times it's found by not the sophisticated people in the room, but the person who went and got the mail that day and opened it up and looked at the thing that had been missing. Do you know, it's so that kind of almost, I know that fiduciary sounds like you should have all this financial information and you should get education on it, but sometimes it is the person going, does this make sense? And asking the question that is I actually am paying attention. I'm not just listening to what other people say. I'm actually thinking about what they're saying.
I think truer words could not be spoken. So let's go back to the notion that nuclear power in a submarine has little to do with the 401k world, but not just in the submarine.
Connect the two.
Well, but just not just in the submarine force, but in the Navy and the military in general. When we see these stories in the news that a ship ran aground or there was a collision at sea or something like that. In almost all those instances, there was one lone sailor in the corner jumping up and down, screaming, saying, hey, we don't know where we are. There's something wrong here. And everyone's saying, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. So I think you're exactly right that in a lot of cases, it goes back to that one individual who asked the one curious question to say, hey, I think we should look at this a little more. 100%.
Yeah. Like the instruments are telling us we're at 100 degrees north, but there isn't 100 degrees north. Something's wrong, right?
Right. And people, let's carry on that. People would just dismiss all the instruments are wrong. Well, it means we don't know where we are.
Okay. Can I go back to something you said a minute ago about the target date funds? All right.
Absolutely.
And a lot of my role is in business development sales, so we have to make things as smooth and as understandable as possible. So I'm coming here to learn, Eric. All right, to see. I'm trying to bust my own myths here. All right. So once upon a time, when target date funds were introduced along, basically, I think of it in parallel with the blanket approval of automatic enrollment, because once upon a time, automatic enrollment was a risky thing. Now it's a mandated thing, right? That's changed in my career time. So target date funds were originally introduced as a bit of a get out of jail free card. If you picked a target date fund, you were okay as far as automatic enrollment was concerned. And you're probably going to tell me it's not that straightforward, and you could possibly have a target date fund from a major vendor that is not appropriate. Are we going to go that far?
Yeah, I can easily address that, because actually one of the more recent cases I worked on had to do with and let's take it's not target dates fund selection. We have to elevate it one higher. It's what's your qualified default investment alternative selection.
Right.
Okay. So there's a tug of war there, and I'll try to make this without going on for 2 hours on it, which I could, but there's a tug of war there that I think most everybody knows. And again, for the audience, anybody who doesn't understand, qualified default investment alternative, QDIA, right, is where you default them into. And most everybody knows, well, as long as you do a balanced account or a managed account or a target date fund, we have a quote unquote safe harbor, which reminder the safe harbor is probably appropriate with a storm, covering the media right now, that it gets a ship to some place safe. That's the metaphor. And a lot of people think just what you said, that as long as I use a target date fund, I'm covered. Well, what is included in the QDIA final regulations is it does not exempt a plan from the general fiduciary requirements of a plan. Okay. So similar, Christopher, to what you said, and I don't even know if this exists anymore, but for a long time it did. If you had a small plan and you went with a record keeper with a bundled arrangement, they said, if you want a target date fund, you need to use our proprietary offering. If you were with Principal, you needed to use theirs. If you were with Fidelity, you need to use theirs. So if a company decided, hey, I don't think this is an appropriate target date fund, or it's just poorly performing, then it is not appropriate for that plan to say, well, we picked a target date fund, so we're okay. That would violate. And I actually had a case of that with a client. They made their record keeper decision. It was like, oh, we have to use their target date fund, and it's new and it's not doing any well. And we did not put target date funds in that plan for quite a while.
Really? Okay. And then there's something else you said that made me think of another phrase, and I think this relates to your field. Is the phrase "expert prudent man" a real phrase? Is that what? Again, once upon a time, I was taught that a plan fiduciary, like the business owner and things like that, for investment. I know we can't use the word advice, but for investment picking and education, all that, there's an obligation to have an expert prudent man provide that education. And I know we're supposed to consider expert prudent man to be a genderless term, but does this concept still exist, or am I completely misunderstanding it, or is it not your realm?
No, it absolutely is, and I'll address that. So let's use it to prudent person versus prudent expert. Okay, and I'm going to start out with what the operative language is for the general fiduciary requirement. It really says to do so similar to someone familiar with such matters. And I'm probably butchering that a little bit. The attorneys are all laughing at me right now, but the idea of a fiduciary is, right, we're acting on behalf of someone else, right? So if there's a trust for a minor and there's a trustee, that trustee has a fiduciary duty, whether it's determined by state law or something else, but they're acting on behalf of someone else. So the real operative language is familiar with similar situations, right? So it has to be someone who's familiar with ERISA law. And then it says, if you don't understand that, then is your obligation to hire someone who's familiar with such matters. So I can be prudent, right? And the example I always give, there's an organization, at least in Texas, I don't know if it's countrywide, but it's called CASA, Child Court-Appointed Special Advocate, right? Where these volunteers advocate on behalf of this child that's displaced due to family violence or whatever, right? And they don't have to be experts in the court's law on minors. They don't have to be experts in child development, right? But as long as they act prudently as a good person, then they meet a prudent person standard. They're not CPS. They're not, health and right. They're not the people that are experts. But if you are an ERISA fiduciary, it is a requirement that you operate as though you're knowledgeable in these matters.
Okay. All right. Is there, and we're going to separate outright crooks from people doing their best, feeling too busy. You know what I mean? The vast majority of plan sponsors out there. Okay. Bernie Madoff excluded. All right. Is there a fiduciary lapse that is unrepairable?
Oh, that's a good question. And the reason I'm laughing, I get some of my best speaking material from good questions like this that I'm not sure. I would think that once you separate the crooks, right? Because if somebody embezzles the money and it disappears and there's not an insurance, I can't think of one, right? Because in general, and that's a word I use a lot in my testimony of litigation, in generally speaking, right, when a plan finds an issue, there are ways to correct it, right? The Department of Labor has their voluntary fiduciary correction program. And also in general, if you confess your sins to the department, hey, we found this, we got a problem, we got to fix it, right? As long as you're moving in the right direction, they generally just want to make it right for the participants. The one recommendation I would give to here's what I've said: if I'm ever engaged with someone and I find a fiduciary breach, I would give this suggestion to all the advisors as well. If you find out your client has a fiduciary breach, say to your client, hey, you need to retain a ERISA attorney and we need to talk about some things. And the reason for that is if they engage in ERISA attorney, now there's attorney-client privilege, right? That it's something to consider. Now, hey, we missed a few payments. We're late on some few payments. We got to get them corrected. That's not what I'm talking about. That's something like, hey, we've been operating our plan wrong for 4 years and somebody knew about it and they've left, and you can still work on fixing those.
So, Eric, I'm wondering, is the unforgivable sin that you're really not a crook, but you've either abandoned the plan or refused to fix really serious problems in the plan? Is that where you're starting to get close to, or is it just still, there's always hope to fix it? I feel like people abandon plans sometimes, and I'm not sure exactly whatever happens. We try to wind them down. Hard to do.
You know what, Kev, you bring up a good point that I said, I can't think of the, unrecoverable, because eventually you could recover it, but let's just take the case of a company that knows they're not making contributions, right, timely, right, and they know it. Is that criminal? Or are they being crooks? I'll let the lawyers in the courts and the Department of Labor figure that out, but yeah, certainly it's possible that someone just doesn't make contributions on time and does it year after year after year, or doesn't make stated matching and they know it. I mean, that's the case where when the Department of Labor finds it, they come in and assess fines, and the Department of Labor does sue people. I'm not here to scare people with a DOL suing people, right? It's just generally they want to help you fix it if there's a problem. So, yeah, I said I don't think there is one, but we would verge on criminal activity when somebody's just being, grossly negligent.
Yeah. Very good. Also, I have the question of, is there a difference between an operational plan fiduciary or an investment co-fiduciary? I mean, can you break out operational fiduciary responsibilities as being distinct from investment ones? Or is it always, you really can't be one without the other?
We're okay. I need a disclaimer here. We're tiptoeing on legal language, right?
Okay.
And I'm not. No. It's okay. I just want to. I mentioned that the attorneys knew I was butchering it, but I think maybe, Catherine, this might help answer the question, right, for the audience to understand it. When we're talking about an ERISA 338 fiduciary, that's someone who's taking discretion of the investments, right? That is an investment piece, right? It comes down to, hey, you need to diversify plan assets to avoid the risk of large losses unless it's prudent not to do so. When you say operational fiduciary, the other thing we have to be careful to distinguish is what is a settler function and what is a fiduciary decision, okay? Most of these, and just to help out the listening audience, right, there are things covered as a Section 321 fiduciary that are not investment related. Right. So decisions on selecting a third-party service provider is a fiduciary decision. So I think that goes into what you're saying is operational, right? But there are still things like plan design issues, how much the match is going to be, those settler functions that go outside of that. And Catherine, I think a little more to help committee members and advisors, if you kind of ask yourself before each decision, is this a settler decision? Is this a fiduciary decision, but not an investment decision or investment? I think remembering which silo you're in helps with that process to make the right decision.
That's actually a good way of separating it out so you have the idea. What, you have a question, Christopher?
And in fact, well, I'd already written down a question, but it basically follows on to hers. How much can a plan sponsor or plan administrator, capital P, capital A, pass off as a fiduciary? Because there's a lot of misconceptions out there, like, oh, I've hired a fiduciary to do this. I have no responsibility. And I'm sure that it's probably like nails on a chalkboard for you. So how do we, what can they do? What protections do they get?
Yeah, when you say nails on the chalkboard, yes and no, because I do address that. And I think maybe here's the best way I bring this up. An example is the most common instance of that is when someone hires an investment advisor as an ERISA 338 advisor, right? So you're delegating the fiduciary responsibility to another party, okay? And in a recent case, and I'm trying to come up with the name of it, hopefully I'll think about it, but the judge made a decision that the investment advisor did not breach their fiduciary responsibility. And therefore, by law, by statute, the plan sponsor did not breach their fiduciary responsibility to monitor their advisor. Actually, it was Lauderdale versus NFP. It was a case that I was on. I was thinking it was another one. But the judge said, since there was no breach of fiduciary responsibility by the advisor, the plan sponsor has not violated their fiduciary duty. That implies that if the advisor had breached their fiduciary duty, that the plan sponsor in this case would have breached their fiduciary for not monitoring. So it's the old, the buck stops here, that every plan sponsor needs to understand they always have a duty to monitor their service providers, no matter how much they've offloaded. If it's a 402 capital A fiduciary, and for those of you in the audience not sure of that, you're basically outsourcing everything except for the decision to hire this person, or 316 to do, hey, we want you to do all our admin. You still have a duty to monitor that. I mean, there's still a contractual requirement, but yes, to your original question, Christopher, I'm being a little verbose here. You can't offload everything. You're hiring people to help you with it.
There's always the fiduciary requirement to monitor. That never goes away. You can't hire somebody to monitor, because then you have to monitor the monitor of the hired person.
Yes, and I think there's always a duty to monitor. If somebody says, well, what if I get involved in a PEP where they're doing it all, pooled employer plan, right? You still have made a fiduciary decision to use this organization. So yes, you always have the responsibility.
So it was great on a curve, meaning how much is considered that you were trying to do the right thing, and how much is it you just have to do the right thing and there's no grading on a curve?
So outside of litigation, I think, when we're talking about DOL and IRS, I'm pretty sure and it's going to depend on each case and each investigator, right? But I think pretty much if plans are trying to do the right thing, that they're there to help you out, right? It's, I think that somebody who's tried to do the right thing for 6, 8, 10, 12 years and never asked for help, that they might say, okay, this has gone a little far. In my opinion, what they're looking for is, hey, we've been doing late contributions for this amount of time. And again, this would be if the DOL showed up randomly, right? Said, yeah, we've been doing this wrong for 4 years. I think what they instantly want to see, and I think this is the answer to go for, is here, we're fixing what happened in the past, but more importantly, here's what we've done now to fix what's going forward as we look at fixing the problem in the past. That's more important than anything else.
Better processes and procedures for the nuclear engine, right?
So,
Yeah.
well,
yes.
Are you going still down this road or a different road?
No, I'm trying to bring us to a close.
Oh, I just really wanted to ask one more question, though, to shift it just a little bit on what steps do you think fiduciaries should take to protect plan assets from fraud and mismanagement?
Well, I can give you an extreme case. I'm working on a case now. Can't really share the details, but there was one trustee.
Eric, it's fine. We're not actually going to publish this. You can tell us.
No, I just can't go into details from a protective order. I mean, if there's only one trustee, right, that's probably not how most committees are running this. But boy, I'm hard pressed when we have daily valuation and we have participant directed accounts, right? It'd be awful hard for a plan to get away with that. So this might sound pretty basic and almost silly, but plans that are out that are still pooled accounts, right, and don't have daily valuation, because they're still around, that I would look to moving to a record keeper or record keeper and TPA arrangement that you've got daily valuation participant directed accounts. And God bless the companies out there that, hey, I just want to do it right for my participants because they're not well educated and I want to take care of them right. And hopefully those are the ones not involved with fraud. But I would say, and, a podcast I have with Kevin Morgan a couple weeks ago that we talk about the basics of blocking and tackling. And Catherine, how do they protect themselves against fraud? There's a lot of basics that if you do the basics, it'll take care of itself.
So and I think good choices.
Daily value, big record keeping partner, Daily Val is a safer choice these days.
Well, and look at what you all do, right? Why does somebody need a good TPA? As a lot of times that the record keepers will say, hey, I think this, and the advisors say, hey, we need a TPA. They need a little more hand holding and they need a little more expertise, right? And just like my story starting out, hey, what's a mutual fund? If they start asking the basic questions, what can I do to stay out of trouble in this? And keep asking those, that goes a long way.
Yeah. I got some specifics to have a conversation with you about later off camera. we know some things.
So, Tom. Yeah, but I do want to sum up your reply. I think it actually sounds like more eyes on it. Having individual accounts, that means you have participants looking, at least a certain percentage of the participants looking, and then a good record keeper with lots of processes helps that out too.
Right. Cybersecurity.
Yeah, and more than one eye inside the company looking at, you can have, to the point earlier, someone who's got the right heart, but if it's a new payroll manager and he or she's processing payroll, and now this isn't fraud, right? But the more probable case, they're just processing it wrong, and nobody checks it, and it goes on for 2 or 3 years like that. That can add up to real money.
Right, like if vacation pay was supposed to be included in the definition of compensation for deferrals, but the payroll was never coded, that's an operational error, not necessarily a fiduciary thing, or have I got it sideways?
I would agree with that. Yeah, generally speaking, sure.
So,
yeah.
One more question and then one more request. Okay. I've been doing this since 1990, and the changes that we've seen on the compliance side is just insane. I think if in February of 1990 somebody had explained Secure 2.0 to us, we'd all left. We'd have quit. We didn't have the tools. Okay. Has there been the same volume, magnitude of change in your side? Because from our side, your side looks stable.
I would say both sides have equally had a lot of changes, a lot of development, things that have come along the way. And what we're trying to do, we as an industry, we being the government, and I don't mean to cast any dispersions on anybody of this, certainly not a political statement, but right, it's tough to legislate doing the right thing. I mean, that's what they're trying to do, right? But if you don't know, or the listeners, if you don't know Don Trone and follow him on LinkedIn, his whole thing about board center fiduciaries and leadership, stewardship, and governance, he talks a lot about, look, here's the regulations, and by regulating people and making these changes, and Secure 2.0 is a great thing, right? But we still can't legislate people to do the right thing. You jokingly mentioned Bernie Madoff earlier. I mean, when I get stuck in a mound of paperwork, I almost always say, thanks a lot, Bernie Madoff, right? It's like most other things, if we pass a law that outlaws the use of cocaine, well, Well, that'll just solve the problem, right? All the drug dealers will go away. Yes, it's a little bit facetious, but there's a lot more legislation. But Christopher, a lot of it, and let's go back to Secure 2.0, a lot of it for the good, right? That authorizes and gives permission for a lot of things to happen.
I'm so sorry about the technical difficulties. We thought we'd had them worked out beforehand, and new ones kept cropping up. So what I would like to do is thank Eric very much for being a guest on our podcast and introducing me to a delicious new drink. I greatly appreciate that. I am looking forward to maybe one day coming and seeing you in your office and sharing one with you in person. All right?
Would love to do that.
So thank you. We're going to share a link with you. What I was going to ask for, if it's okay, we'll have this listed in the show notes. If you could list probably the 5 most frequent fiduciary breaches you see, I would like to share that in the podcast notes, if that's okay, and we can discuss that later. And once again, do you have any parting words other than you're never doing our podcast again?
No, I'm not saying that. So just so I'm clear, am I giving you the 5 common ones now, or you want those for the show notes?
Why don't you show for the show notes?
Okay, got it. And I want to be clear on something. Fiduciary breach is a legal term, right? That the lawyers are determined. I'll give you what I feel are fiduciary shortcomings that plan sponsors could do better with.
Ooh, that's much better. I like that one. We're going to do a short on that one. All right, Eric, that's perfect. That's exactly what we're looking for. Thank you, Eric. All right. Okay. So this has been the 401 Couple with another podcast with Eric Dyson. Take care, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Christopher and Catherine. Thank you.
Thank you.